Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at 10 things that pros do that you probably don't. Of course, make sure to stick around to the end of the video so you don't miss any of these tips. 65% of you guys are not subscribed, so definitely make sure to subscribe before we get into it. Tip number one, first siege bolt importance. So the first siege bolt is so important, and particularly in pro games, you're going to see a lot of brawlers like Buzz, like Mortis, particularly now. Buzz because of the gadget, Mortis because you can dash and get that first siege bolt. Obviously, first siege bot is so important. If you do end up getting the first bot, you're pretty much going to have a much higher chance of winning the game. So on the first round of siege, there's going to be a maximum of 4 bolts that you can claim essentially before the timer runs out. And obviously, if you get the first one, you only need one more to actually secure at least a draw at minimum. And yeah, make sure if you're playing siege, you mainly want to have somebody that can get that first siege bolt, and it's going to help you out a lot. Tip number 2, ball positioning. So this is particularly obviously for Brawl Ball. It's going to be about how you position the ball when you're attacking and defending. Obviously, if you're defending, you want to make sure that ball is cornered, especially on maps like Sneaky Field, where there is a perfect pocket for the ball. This is going to make it a lot harder for your enemies to get the ball and therefore score, making it easier for you to defend. So on the other side of things, if you're attacking, you obviously want to make sure that you have control of the ball, and what this means is not giving them the ball so they can corner it. You want to keep it in a position behind a wall, usually pretty close to the goal where the enemies can't get it, but where if you need to, if you get a team wipe, you can pass that ball up and make sure you get a goal very quickly. Tip number 3, comp synergy. So when you see pros playing, they're not going to go a random tank if the comp is not based around it. Either they're going to go like triple tank, or if they're playing 2 tanks, they're going to go a healer, so like a Poke or a Byron for that third brawler, or sometimes a Max, because Max can be really good when paired with tanks. Also, you're going to see some wall break comps on Hot Zone and maybe Siege, so those could be like B, Colt, Frank. So the Frank and the Colt are going to open up the map for B. Also, you're going to see brawlers like Sandy, Ems, Tara, those kind of brawlers that work really well with speed being used with a lot of Max. So those are just a few examples of kind of comps that kind of synergize really well together. Tip number 4, bolt stalling. So of course this is going to be in siege, to do with the siege bolts. So say you went to get that first siege bolt on the right, the enemy's going to get the one on the left. Instead of picking up the next one that spawns on the right, you're going to wait until the timer is 6 to 7 seconds until the round kind of closes, and then you're going to pick up the bolt. What this is going to do is going to stall the next bolt on the left hand side from spawning, and obviously if your enemies have control on the left, they would have picked this up and they would have been able to tie it. But because you waited to pick up this bolt, it takes 5 seconds by the way for the bolt to get back, but because you waited, you're gonna be in a 2-1 lead, ensuring you get that first siege bot. But yeah, this is just one of many ways that pros use this siege kind of bolt stalling in order to secure siege bosses for themselves. Just before we get into the next tip, make sure you're using a creator code in the shop. If you want to support me, you can use code TOM. Tip number 5, pinching between your mid and your lanes. So this tip is pretty usable on those longer range maps, particularly where you're playing brawlers like Brock, Piper, Bell. So this is basically simply when either someone is hiding behind like a small wall, and essentially if you're in call with someone, or now just because you know this tip, you can start shooting them, pinching with between your lane and your mid in order to kind of basically make it so they have nowhere to move. Also, you can use a tip when they are pushing up. If they're pushing very aggressive, simply if you're playing mid or lane, you both have to essentially focus the same person, and therefore like 2 people shooting that person, they're essentially going to die very quickly because they're not going to be able to dodge those shots. Of course, unless your name is Chief Pat, then you probably have to dodge those shots, to be honest. But anyway, 2 people shooting at one lane should ensure that you're going to be able to pick up that kill, because there should not be any way that they can dodge both of you, and you should be able to pick up the kill quite easily. Tip number 6 is going to be to count your opponent's ammo when they have slow reload speed. So this is very usable against a magnitude of brawlers. You probably don't want to use this against tanks because it's very hard to track, but against those longer range brawlers and mid-range brawlers, you can definitely use this. So essentially how this works is you are essentially baiting out shots of your enemy. Usually you're going to count the ammo, so 1, 2, 3, then they've used all of the ammo, but they would have reloaded pretty much 1 ammo back, depending on what brawler they're playing. So usually I wait until they've missed 4 to 5 shots, then that is kind of your chance to go aggressive, because you know they have no ammo, and you know that if you haven't been hit by any of them, you're at full HP, so you can capitalize on this if you are keeping track of the ammo. Tip number 7, use the correct gears. So this one is essentially a bonus tip. It's going to be very, very quick. If you didn't watch my gears tier list, then here you have it summed up for you very quickly. You want to use the speed gear and the shield gear like 90% of the time. You want to always be using that shield gear. It's so OP. Then for the other 10% of the time, you want to be using the damage gear. So where there is a limited amount of grass on the map, there's not much grass at all, you want to be using damage and shield gears. Tip number 8, outpick your opponents. So now that pretty much everyone has played a draft format of Brawl Stars, whether that's in Club League or Power League, whatever you've used it, it's easier than ever to kind of outpick and outcomp your opponents. So what this means is by countering them with your brawler picks, if they're going throwers and say weak brawlers like Brock Piper, you can pick a Mortis to counter them. I would say if they got a Piper Sprout, you know, you can pick a Mortis and whatever that third is, you're going to be able to destroy them. The same goes for if you're choosing your own brawlers. If you already have a Sprout on your team, don't pick something else that's weak against Mortis. And, you know, if your opponents have 2 tanks, then you can pick things like Ems, Shelly, things that counter tanks. This is pretty simple, but I feel like a lot of people, particularly on the defending side, don't think enough about what their comp can be countered by. So kind of go too many weak brawlers, say to Mortis, they end up getting destroyed by Mortis. So don't do that. Also, this not only goes for brawler picks, but also for gadget gears and star power picks. A good example of this is if you're playing Piper and you come up against a Mortis, you can actually swap to that auto aimer gadget. That's going to help you defend yourself against the Mortis a little bit. But of course, this is just one example. There is a ton of things you can do with gadgets, gears, and star powers to give you a better matchup. Tip number 9, Minecart Madness. So Minecart Madness is one of the most complex maps in the entire game. Now, the first tip is whichever side spawns with 5 mushrooms on, it will essentially get the first minecart, which means the first minecart will be pushing towards the enemy side, essentially pushing them back and giving the team that spawns with the 5 mushrooms a big advantage. So whenever there is a minecart going towards the enemies, you always want to push with it, as it's going to push them back, and if you push with it, it's going to give you good control of the map. Then you want to hold your position as high on the map as possible, ideally above the kind of middle minecart line, so that when the minecart comes pushing onto your side, you're not going to get pushed back with it, and you can just hold control for the entire game. Tip number 10, editing your controls. So it is so important to make sure that your controls work for you. Personally, these are my controls on the screen right now. These are the way I have my buttons set up on the screen. So they are pretty much default, apart from I have the gadget button, like the biggest it can possibly be, because I feel like the only thing that I actually miss, if I'm missing a button, it's usually that gadget button. I also have my super button and my normal attack button slightly bigger than the default, just so it's easier to honestly use them. So definitely try out what works for you. I know some players that play with like a claw grip, like Drage, that actually have the gadget button where my pin button is, and that ensures that they can, you know, use it with a different finger than the rest of the buttons. So that kind of helps out, but definitely change it up and use what works for you. That's gonna wrap it up for the video. If any of the tips helped you, definitely make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.